When you think about Family Feud, you think about Steve Harvey. And how could you not? For 11 years and counting, he has made the show into a ratings juggernaut and an online cultural phenomenon. And for most people, the fact that anyone else ever hosted the show is either a distant memory or, for some, perhaps even completely new information. But I'm here to tell a story, so for now, forget Steve Harvey. It's 1995, and the second run of Family Feud has just been canceled after a 7-year run with ratings that were average at best and dreadful at worst. It seems like the glory days of Family Feud really are over for good, and now that the show has been canceled, it seems like Family Feud itself may be done for good. So, what happens next? What does the future hold for this franchise? Well, if you'll bear with me for the next several minutes, we'll take a look through the many attempts to relaunch Family Feud back into relevancy, and sooner or later, maybe we'll land on one that actually works. In October of 1995, the company that owned Family Feud, Mark Goodson Productions, which also owned a bunch of other classic game show formats, was purchased by a company called All American Television for $50 million. All American was already a big player in television syndication, and though they were best known for Baywatch, which they both made and distributed, they were also involved in the final years of Family Feud's second run, during which time they served as the show's distributor. Now, before we get too far along, here is a little recap on how syndication works. Syndication is when a TV show is not on any individual network, but instead, the show is sold directly to individual stations. The two big players in any syndicated show are the production company, which makes the show, and the distributor, which goes around negotiating deals and selling the show to stations. That is more than a bit of a simplification, but it's all you'll need to know for this video. Anyway, now that All American owned all sorts of dormant game show formats, they were naturally looking to bring out the defibrillator and start up some revivals. The first two Goodson properties that All American decided to revive were Match Game and Card Sharks, which both taped pilots in 1996. The pair was supposed to premiere in the fall of 1997, but unfortunately everything went south for these projects. First, their distribution partner, Tribune Entertainment, abruptly backed out. Then stations found the pilots themselves unappealing, in part because they were both significantly different from the shows that they were based on, but also because game shows as a whole weren't really a hot entity at the time, a fact reinforced by a high-profile failure of a couple of relationship game shows during that season. But also, there was one thing that stations consistently suggested to All American, and that was that they should consider bringing back Family Feud. Where Match Game and Card Sharks had both been off the air for over 5 years by this point, even longer if you only count the nighttime syndicated versions, Family Feud had just left the air about a year earlier, and it hadn't exactly gone out in style. But it was the most recognizable name in the Mark Goodson catalog, so All American, obediently catering to the whims of its stations, began developing a Family Feud revival in December of 1996, initially hoping to launch it alongside Match Game and/or Card Sharks the next fall, although shortly afterward they delayed the projects to launch mid-season in 1998. All American had a couple of guys on their radar to potentially host the feud. There was Gordon Elliott, a tall Australian with a trashy talk show, and Doug Davidson, who played the character Paul Williams on The Young and the Restless, starting in 1978 and actually only stopping in 2018. Soap operas, man. Anyway, Davidson had actually appeared on Family Feud a number of times with the cast of The Young and the Restless, and he had hosted a very short-lived syndicated revival of The Price is Right in 1994, so he was an active figure in the game show scene. Variety actually published in 1997 that Davidson was cast as the host. Now, I reached out to a number of people affiliated with Family Feud for this project, trying to lock down interviews and just get some more information about the show. And by some weird miracle, I actually got a response out of Doug Davidson through his Twitter DMs, of all places. And he denied signing on to host Family Feud, and also seemed not to know what I was even talking about. I followed up by asking whether he had any involvement with the Family Feud revival at all, which he answered plainly, I didn't. So, I guess the Variety article was wrong. It doesn't matter anyway. By March of 1997, plans to launch these shows mid-season had been scrapped, and all eyes were on the fall of 1998, which was shaping up to be the year of the game show. By this point, talk shows really were wearing thin with audiences, and since game shows were typically comparable in expense to produce, a bunch of them got set to launch, including a particularly highly anticipated Hollywood Squares revival with Whoopi Goldberg and Tom Bergeron. For their part, All American was prepping revivals of Match Game and Family Feud, having scrapped card sharks. The match game revival panned out. It was sold to stations and premiered in the fall of 1998, but Family Feud was delayed yet again, as the show's development was being held up by one critical problem: the inability to decide on a host. In late 1997, All American was bought by a British company called Pearson, perhaps best known today as an education conglomerate. If you've spent much time in a school in the English-speaking world, you've probably worked with a Pearson textbook or taken a Pearson standardized test. In fact, check this out. I took this photo in a college class I'm taking right now, and, well, look at that. Pearson also owned Penguin Books, a massive book publisher, and the Financial Times, a massive business newspaper. And apparently, in the 90s, they were on a quest to conquer all media, and they invested heavily in television with their purchase of All American. Right around the time of this acquisition, maybe as a result of it, or maybe just coincidentally at the same time, Pearson started making a run for country music superstar Dolly Parton to be the host of Family Feud. Rumor had it that Dolly was looking to get back into television, a medium she had maintained a fairly consistent presence on in the 70s and 80s, but from which she had mostly disappeared by 1997. Dolly wanted back in, and Pearson had a coveted opening in Family Feud. The talks must have gotten pretty serious, because many sources note the potential of a Dolly Parton Family Feud, but ultimately the talks with Dolly Parton were fruitless. So in the spring of 1998, as the producers began considering their non-Dolly options, one name that came up was that of Louie Anderson. Louie was another comedian. He grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota as the second youngest of 11 children. His father abused alcohol, and his family life was vibrant, to say the least, and it served as the backbone of much of his comedy. In 1984, after a few years of honing his craft, he too was booked for a breakout appearance on Johnny Carson's Tonight Show. His set was very well received, especially by Johnny Carson, who invited Louie back on stage to take a second bow and shake his hand after his set was long over. It was the launching pad into a successful career in comedy and acting, perhaps most notably including a small role in the Eddie Murphy movie Coming to America. Louie also had a children's cartoon based on his childhood called Life with Louie that ran for 3 seasons on Fox Kids starting in 1994, and though it wasn't wildly popular in the US, it was apparently a smash hit in Eastern Europe. He also had a sitcom on CBS that ran for a season in 1996. Louie was a popular guy and a pretty hot talent by the late 90s, both on TV as well as on the live comedy scene in Las Vegas, and he landed on the radar of Pearson TV. Louie got the call about hosting Family Feud and was immediately a little surprised. Family Feud was that game show where Richard Dawson kissed all those women. Louie was a comedian who made jokes about his weight. But he claims that after thinking about the offer, he came to feel a connection between the familial themes of his comedy and those of Family Feud. Plus, he had been a fan of the show under both Dawson and Combs, so he felt like it could maybe actually potentially be a good fit after all. Alright, what's the next step? We're gonna shoot a pilot, right? That's generally how the process goes. But no, Louie didn't actually want to. He believed that a pilot was just a chance for someone to say no. Well, be that as it may, Pearson still needed something to show to stations while they were selling the show, so Louie proposed a sort of half-pilot, where he went through the motions on a scaled-back version of the show featuring his own family members as the contestants. It wasn't even on any sort of set. Apparently, they just brought his family on stage after one of his comedy sets in Las Vegas. I have never heard of anything like that happening before, but Pearson agreed, and the tape was well received, and they ended up signing Louie for $1.5 million. And with that, the revival was official, and Pearson began publicizing it with the tagline, "The Meeting of Two Great Heavyweights." The show was slated to come back on September 20th, 1999, and to help me talk about it, I've enlisted the help of Bob Boden.
I'm Bob Boden. I am a game show historian. I'm a co-founder of the National Archives of Game Show History. I'm a former head of programming for the Game Show Network. I currently work as an executive producer of Funny You Should Ask, and I was a supervising producer on part of the first season of the current version of Family Feud when Louie Anderson was host.
Boden was one of 3 big players involved in the development of this revival, the other 2 being executive producer Michael Cantor and Pearson liaison Sid Vintage. For his part, Boden had been a fan of Family Feud since it first began.
I was very pleased, I'd say borderline ecstatic to get the call to work on Family Feud. It had always been a favorite show of mine. It was a classic game show. When we got into the later stages of development, which was when I was brought in, I was asked to put together the shell script, which is sort of the outline script of the show into which the material is placed. And I did it from memory. I didn't have to look at the old show to remember the beats of the show.
And it was this attitude of reverence for the original show that served as the foundation for the show's development and sales effort. The show was touted as, quote, almost entirely the same as it was, and that, quote, the only different element is going to be Louie. Despite that, the show still ran into issues when trying to get stations to sign on.
I know the show had a struggle to get sold. The gentleman who was out pounding the pavement was a guy named Joe Scotti. Joe was a longtime syndication salesman. He was quite adept at what he did, and he did his best. I think some of the early time periods were challenging. It was hard to get a show cleared. It was almost impossible to get a game show cleared in access because Wheel and Jeopardy were so dominant at the time. Many of the other stations had commitments either to the news magazines, the Entertainment Tonight's and the Inside Editions of the world, or to off-network sitcoms, which at the time there was a plethora of those. It would not be unusual in a market with 4 broadcast stations to have 2 of them running sitcoms in prime access, 1 running a news magazine block, and 1 running Wheel and Jeopardy. So it wasn't so easy to get into good time periods.
Pearson was ultimately able to clear Family Feud in more than 75% of the country by the time it premiered. And as the show geared up to air, hopes were high once again.
We had a very skeleton staff, very few people. We did not have a large staff, but everybody was dedicated. Everybody worked hard. Everybody liked each other. And we all believed that Family Feud could have another record-breaking run.
September 20th, 1999 was the day that Family Feud returned to U.S. television. Now, we all know what Family Feud looked and sounded like during its first 2 runs. You know, it was modest, it was simple, with Gene Wood's voice.
Let's meet the Jeffrey family.
That classic little tune, those sliding backdrops, and a little light show on the robin's egg as the host enters stage right. Even with the set changes in 1994, it was more a fresh coat of paint than an absolute overhaul. Well, with that in mind, here's what audiences saw when the revival debuted.
Today on Family Feud, from San Diego, California, comes a family so wild they should be locked up in a zoo bra. It's the Dubra! From Newhall, California, when these guys jump in the ring, you know things are gonna get gory. Meet the Story family! You're about to see these 2 teams battle it out for $10,000 in cash, cause it's time to play the Family Feud! Now here's the star of our show, Louie Anderson!
Wow, a lot to unpack there. Let's start with the announcer, a man named Burton Richardson.
There was talk about who should announce, and it was felt that Burton Richardson brought a new energy and excitement to the show, which I completely agree with. You know, nobody can sell an intro like Burton. He's got such a rich tone and an energy to him that best exemplified on the Arsenio Hall show.
It's Arsenio!
I think he's still actually saying the word Arsenio. It's gone on that many years. I mean, Family Feud needed a contemporization. It needed a makeover. The technology in TV production had evolved even since the prior version, and it needed to take advantage of the technology that existed at the time.
That modernization is on full display if you pay attention to the new production style, which is far more dynamic. All of those camera sweeps and zooms and pans from all sorts of angles, all the dramatic lighting cues, the rising wall, the bold font, the redesigned Fast Money board, and that killer CGI opening with that sweet new logo. It all plays into the show's refreshed identity. This was no longer a comfortable little show on daytime television in 1976. This was an event. And of course, there's a new set.
Well, Fremantle was very, very supportive of the new version. They knew it was a classic show. It hadn't been on in about 5 years. They wanted to refresh it, but also make it authentic. So the changes were largely cosmetic. A new set was in order. It took on a modern look. I know you have a problem with needlepoint, and that was long gone.
This set has sort of a chrome and brushed metal material theme with lights and abstract shapes everywhere, really sending the message that this show is modern. And where the old sets mostly use either 90-degree angles or ovals, this set finally takes the bold step of introducing rounded rectangles. Truly, It was a new beginning for Family Feud.
The one thing that I wish we hadn't done, which was corrected later on, was change the theme music. And I liked the new theme music, but it didn't feel like Family Feud to me. I think we went a step too far in that direction. But I think the set looked great.
As for format changes, well, we gotta have some of those. For this version, the main game consisted of 3 single-value rounds and 1 triple-value round. And unlike versions past, where you typically needed 300 points to win, in this version, it's just whichever family has the most points once all of these rounds are over. The triple-value round also has a new mechanic. It was a 1-strike round. 1 incorrect answer, and your family loses control of the board. This served partially to help out with timing the episode, and partially just to boost the drama, since the final round was almost always the single deciding factor in the course of the game. These changes were balanced out by reversing some of the other changes that had been made during the Ray Combs era of the show, including the bullseye round.
Yeah, I don't think there were many fans left of the bullseye round. I certainly was not one. I don't think Michael was. I don't think Sid was. We felt that it was not the heart of the game. The heart of the game was going through the board. Audience involvement, engagement in the process was better suited to boards with 4 answers, 6 answers, 8 answers than just going for number 1. That decision was I think, an easy one to make, and I certainly was on board with it. One thing that I was largely responsible for was I brought back pass or play. I believed that the previous version, which obligated the families to play, sometimes put them in a situation where they were set up to fail, or elected. No, they were set up to fail. I wanted to give the families the opportunity to choose their fate, and I fought to restore the pass or play option. Most families at the time did not use it. To this day, most families don't use it. The going belief is that if you pass, you're losing control and that you're sacrificing good opportunity to win the question. But my feeling was that that should be a decision left to the families, not to the producers.
And lastly, there's Louie Anderson. His approach to hosting the show slowed things down a little bit, which offered a nice counter to the futuristic theme of the rest of the show. While Louie makes plenty of jokes, his humor really shines just in his demeanor and his overall energy, because his emphasis seemed to be less about making the show overtly funny as it was just about making it fun.
Louie was great to work with. At first, he needed to understand the mechanics of a game show. As a comic performer, he was all about telling jokes and getting laughs, and he was quite adept at that. Game show hosting didn't come easy to him. It was a learning curve because he had to understand and integrate the mechanical part of it, which is the rules and the strategies, and being the part traffic cop and tour guide for the audience as to where we were in the game. And initially, I think he felt that since the show had been on for so long in various different versions, that the audience didn't need that level of explanation. But we convinced him that it was important, and he found a way to integrate the rules and the strategies and the reminders into his comedy. And he made it his own. He was absolutely different than Richard Dawson and Ray Combs, but he was his own voice. I believe he added a style and a humor to the show that it hadn't had before.
So now it's time for the big question. Did it succeed? In the first wave of ratings for this season, Family Feud posted a 1.5 rating, which, believe it or not, was actually considered reasonably solid for a new show in syndication by this point in time, since new shows usually got thrown into pretty weak time slots. And 1999 happened to be a really good time for a game show to come on the air, thanks to Who Wants to Be a Millionaire?
This was the beginning of the new Renaissance era for primetime game shows. Right around the time that Feud came on, Millionaire also came on, and it just took the country by storm and sparked a new era of primetime game that had not been really exploited since the quiz show scandals of the 50s and 60s. Game shows were hot, which helped Feud, I think, survive, and it allowed me to branch out to do a primetime series. So unfortunately, I had to leave Feud in the middle of that first season, but I left it in capable hands, and clearly the show has made it since then.
Ratings for Family Feud peaked in January of 2000 at a 2.6. It was the second best newcomer that season, and really the only one putting up a good fight against the new onslaught of courtroom shows, which were just all the rage. But it really didn't compete with the Titans. Compare it to Wheel of Fortune, which was posting a 10.9, or Jeopardy! A 9.2. Even Hollywood Squares was hovering around a 4.2, and it was just in its second season. Pearson, however, judged that Family Feud was performing well enough not only to renew it for a second season, but also to launch another revival of a Mark Goodson show, this time To Tell the Truth, which was hosted by some white-haired guy named John O'Hurley. And over the course of the season, many stations that carried the show were upgrading its time slot, which was a clear show of faith for the hot new revival. It might not have changed the world, but it was a success. While the first season was airing, news broke of an extortion scandal with Louie Anderson at its center. The details really aren't worth getting into here, but suffice it to say, Louie's reputation took a hit when the story wound up in the tabloids. Pearson reportedly panicked a little at this news, fearing that the scandal could really damage the show, and they seriously considered the prospect of replacing Louie. However, the show's production staff really stood behind their man, and the steady ratings for the show really didn't give any reason for worry, so Louie was kept on the show, now free of the burden of secrecy. But as the show entered its sophomore season, his performance did begin attracting more criticism. The novelty of having Louie Anderson as the host seemed to have worn off for audiences, as well as for Louie Anderson himself. It seemed like the demanding production schedule of Family Feud had really caught up to him, because as the show went on and his hair grew longer, there were times where Louie just seemed exhausted, as though he was only going through the motions. His energy was low, and the fun he seemed to be having in his first season was overall less palpable. Louie was famous for being a warm, cheery presence wherever he went, but it just doesn't come across in these later episodes. Mad TV in particular was going to town on Louie Anderson during this time, casting Will Sasso to portray Louie as depressed, self-loathing, and incredibly rude.
Francis on the board there. You guys do the thing. Everyone's seen her as this stupid crap. Here we go.
However, perhaps thanks to the strong format of the show, ratings actually remained steady. Pearson renewed Family Feud for a third season, and they launched a third game show, a reboot of Card Sharks with Pat Bullard at the helm. In the third season, the only real change was the value of the grand prize, which finally got upgraded for the very first time since the syndicated version of the show had launched all the way back in 1977. $10,000 $1977 were worth nearly $30,000 $2001, and Louie himself fought hard to increase the prize, apparently with a lot of resistance from the powers that be. Ultimately, the prize was raised to $20,000, which actually remains the grand prize today over 20 years later. This season is also notable for a Tournament of Champions that was capped off by a special game played to 500 points with no bonus round, the only time I'm aware of that a game of Family Feud has ever been played without fast money. And speaking of special games, it was around this time that another addition to the Family Feud franchise was in the works. While I was making this video, I was contacted by a former executive with Pearson TV, who revealed to me that a pilot was taped for a spin-off version of Family Feud in 2001. The spin-off was commissioned by cable channel VH1, a music channel that had launched a game show called Rock and Roll Jeopardy! In 1998. As the title would suggest, it was a spin-off of Jeopardy! That was themed around popular music, and it had been a solid performer for VH1, and it led to the development of another music-themed game show adaptation, this one dubbed Rock Feud. Now, where Rock and Roll Jeopardy! Was played by ordinary people just with music-themed questions, the pilot for Rock Feud reversed that concept, having the contestants be music-themed, in this case the quintessentially 2001 bands Lit and Save Ferris. Slotted as the host was comedian Johnny Sanchez, and the show was described as involving edgier types of questions. According to this account of events, quote, "The show was very close to hitting the air, but the network changed their minds last second." This pilot likely still exists somewhere, but my source did not have access to a copy, and it has never surfaced online. Everything I've told you seems to be everything that's publicly known. It's hard to say whether something like this would have been a success without actually seeing it in action, but I certainly don't think a more adult version of Family Feud with a stand-up comedian as host was doomed to fail. Even though this version of the game never came to fruition, it did provide one lasting addition to the Family Feud franchise. Tell me if this music sounds familiar. Yes, that catchy little beat that plays during Fast Money, it came along thanks entirely to the creative team on Rock Feud. Anyway, back to Family Feud itself, whose ratings were stagnating as season 3 was airing. It's not like it was tanking, but it wasn't growing like Pearson had wanted. Actually, side note, Pearson was involved with a merger in 2001. I'll spare you the details. Now, Family Feud is made by a company called Fremantle Media. Also, very shortly afterward, Fremantle entered a distribution deal with Tribune. Tribune was going to be distributing all the shows in Fremantle's library, and upon the deal going through, To Tell the Truth and Card Sharks were both almost instantly canceled. But instead of axing Family Feud, they decided that the format was promising enough to keep around, it just needed some changes. Change number 1, the staff. The show's director, executive producer, they all got swapped out with fresh blood. Change number 2, the set, which was overhauled to add a lot more wood and an overall more orangey-brown color scheme with a dynamically backlit wall and these huge screens for the family backdrops. But the biggest change was change number 3, the decision to drop Louie Anderson and immediately begin the search for a new host. Louie would later describe the news as devastating and the apex of a highly painful period in his life. He acknowledged that he had become complacent with the show's success and that he wishes he had worked harder and been nicer during his time on Feud. The news hurt, but Louie still had bills to pay, so he ended up going right back into comedy, beginning a live show in Las Vegas that would go on to endure for over a decade. He also publicly predicted in 2002 that Family Feud, with whichever host was selected to replace him, would be canceled after only a year. The search for a new host reportedly included overtures to Al Roker, the weatherman on The Today Show, who declined the position out of a desire to stay in New York rather than move to LA. So, alright, he's out. Who else could we get? Well, how about Richard Karn? Richard Karn was an actor originally from Seattle who had landed a bunch of small acting roles in theater and television while he lived in New York during the 1980s. He moved to Los Angeles in 1989, and he continued his obscure career until, through a sequence of events involving a rolling stop and the film career of Stephen Tobolowsky, Karn landed the role of Al Borland on Home Improvement, which was the mild-mannered, flannel-wearing best friend and sidekick to main character Tim, portrayed by Tim Allen. The show premiered on ABC in the fall of 1991, and it was an instant success, ending its first season as the 4th most popular show in primetime. And it was an enduring success, remaining in the top 10 for the entirety of its 8-year run. Once the show ended in 1999, Karn's career slowed down for a few years, mainly consisting of sporadic TV guest appearances, among them a spot on the panel for the pilot of To Tell the Truth with John O'Hurley. Pearson liked Richard Karn, and they invited him to be a series regular on the panel, but he declined. After all, he was an actor. What business did he have in the world of game shows? Well, in 2002, Richard got another call from Pearson, this time asking if he would be interested in taking the reins of Family Feud. And at first, he declined this offer as well. He had the same concerns as before, and besides, wasn't Louie Anderson already doing that show? But it was Karn's agent who encouraged him to really think about accepting the role, and eventually Karn came around, taping a pilot, as well as a music video with The Strokes, and ultimately agreeing to be the new host of Family Feud for 5 years, with his debut coming in the fall of 2002.
Thank you. You guys, thank you very much. You've made me feel right at home.
Richard Karn's first season kept the format of the Louie Anderson version, though interestingly enough, a handful of episodes from this season actually reverted to the classic theme music, but they also remixed it. Anyway, other than that, the only thing to talk about here is Richard Karn, who, like Louie, can be a bit of a divisive figure. Unlike his predecessors, who were all comedians in some capacity, Karn was a pure-blooded actor, which is a field involving a very different set of talents. Actors have scripts. Their every move is staged and planned out before any cameras even start rolling. Being a game show host, on the other hand, is nothing but improvising, so it was definitely a departure from Richard Karn's comfort zone. He brings a big smile and a lot of enthusiasm, along with a very distinct brand of ad-libs. Anytime someone says something, you can kind of tell he's looking for something clever to say, some little riff just to be amusing, but I think it's easy to tell that this isn't really his wheelhouse. A good way to demonstrate what I'm trying to say here is to watch how he throws to commercial. He usually likes to make some remark about about the round that just unfolded, but that usually just amounts to him repeating a few of the answers from the board in a way that's not really even a joke, it's just him listing things.
Show me Malachi. Come on back. Matthew, Mark, Mary, and Mary too. We got them all.
None of this is to say that he's a bad host. Actually, to the contrary, I think he brings a charm to the show with his cheesy teddy bear energy. Karn did have some characteristic quirks, like his wardrobe, which rarely ever included a tie and was sometimes just a sweater or something even more casual. What's weirder is that the few times he did wear a tie, I actually thought it looked a little strange on him. It's a shame he couldn't keep wearing flannel. He also had a few little catchphrases.
I'm tripling the points. I'm tripling the points. I'm tripling the points. I'm tripling the points. I'm tripling the points.
The show's ratings actually improved under Karn. A little over a year into his run, the show was up over 20%. In his second season, the format was tweaked again. They got rid of the one strike mechanic for the final question, and they made the third question a double value question. They also brought back a winning score of 300 instead of just awarding victory to whichever family was in the lead after 4 rounds. In the event that neither family reached 300, this season introduced the sudden death round, which was, in essence, a bullseye question. It was technically an extra round, but with only the number 1 answer on the board. If you got that answer, congratulations, your family won the game. The only other change here was this adjustment to the 4th and final question of the game.
Okay, but pay attention, Jeremy and Mickey. I'm only reading this question once, so everybody pay attention, remember what it said.
And he meant it. You are not going to hear that question again. I don't know if this change was made for time or to raise the drama or just because Richard Karn didn't like repeating himself. In any case, this version of the show's format would be retained for the rest of Richard Karn's run. This version of the show also did a lot of specials. The Halloween ones stand out to me. They go absolutely all out, decking out this set with spooky decorations. Everyone's in costume, including Richard. There's a fog machine, and one year the games themselves were played by little kids in a boys versus girls matchup. Older versions of Family Feud had also had some fun with Halloween, but this version just really took it up a notch. And those weren't the only special themes for this set. There was a week of shows with ice skaters, and they decided to deck out the set in an ice theme. There was a Pizza Hut special, and the set was decorated to look like Pizza Hut. There was a Tournament of Champions with a trip to Hawaii at stake, so they decorated the set in this super elaborate tropical island theme. And that is just the tip of the iceberg. There were theme shows with soap opera stars, fire departments, military branches, divorced couples, American Idol contestants, cast members from Survivor, NASCAR racers, Playboy playmates, the list goes on and on and on. There were so many specials. I guess they were shooting to keep the show fresh and whimsical, and I guess I can't fault them for that, because for most of Richard Karn's run after the initial boost from the Anderson era, the show remained steady, usually between the 2.0 and 2.5 mark in the ratings, which was good enough to keep it profitable and keep getting it renewed. For Richard Karn's 4th season, they changed the design of the set, making everything a lot more colorful and adding these squares to the backdrop and really going to town with trapezoids everywhere else. They also made the Fast Money board a bright orange. It made for a vibrant look, perhaps a little too vibrant. I think all the bold lines and shapes and colors are pretty distracting, actually. Now, you might remember that Richard Karn had a 5-year contract, which would have run from the beginning of the 02-03 season through the end of the 06-07 season. The contract also guaranteed Richard some pay raises as time went on, including a 17% salary bump for his 5th and final season. However, for some reason, Fremantle had a change of heart when this time came, inviting Richard back for a 5th season without any change to his salary. Richard remained insistent that the raise take effect, but Fremantle did not budge. The dispute proved unresolvable, and Richard stepped away from the show 1 season early despite relatively solid ratings. Well, Richard's gone, so it's time to find host number 5, and guess what? I've already mentioned him. John O'Hurley was their pick, the white-haired guy from To Tell the Truth. O'Hurley has an acting career stretching back to the early 80s, when he popped up in a bunch of different soap operas and, believe it or not, Family Feud, where he appeared as a celebrity contestant at the tail end of Richard Dawson's original run. Over the next 20 years, O'Hurley would build a respectable career in television acting, with a laundry list of guest spots and a few leading roles, including appearing on the one-season UPN classic, The Mullets. However, he is no doubt best known for his recurring role on Seinfeld, where he played Elaine's boss, Jay Peterman, during the last few seasons of the show. He also found time to host Pearson's reboot of To Tell the Truth for 2 seasons beginning in 2000, and it might be for that reason that he was on the radar to host Family Feud. His performance on the first season of a hot new show called Dancing with the Stars in 2005 might have also helped. O'Hurley got the call about hosting Family Feud and immediately accepted the offer, signing on to host the show for 5 years beginning in the fall of 2006. And of course, it would not be a Family Feud host transition without a brand new set, and here it is. This set was a modern take on the classic sets of the Dawson and Combs versions. The oval housing for the board returned, the 90-degree angles returned, and they even brought back the whole inset living room bit for introducing the families. But the lighting and production style remained as flashy and dynamic as ever. The theme music also got a slight update, the board's color scheme got swapped out, and they dropped the egg crate scoreboards in favor of a serif font. Come on. Last thing, they changed the logo to this 3D one. Looks great on the cover of the video game, not sure how well it fits into this aesthetic. Anyway, there weren't any changes to the format, just the set and the host. John O'Hurley pretty much looks like the type of game show host you would create in a lab. He's tall, actually the first Family Feud host to crack 6 foot. He's clean cut, he is objectively handsome, and he has a fantastic, silky smooth baritone voice.
Okay. Survey says.
In a way, he brings to mind the Richard Dawson energy of effortless cool, with a brand of humor defined by lighthearted banter and some wry little smirks after a dubious answer. While O'Hurley did a fine job of keeping the wheels turning on Family Feud, I think it's hard to make the contention that he really brought anything particularly unique or special to the show, for better or worse. A good host, no doubt, but unlike his predecessors, his take on the show was just a little more generic. The only trademark O'Hurley bit that I can think of was this little gag.
You can't duplicate any of the answers. If you do, you're going to hear this sound.
But even this was phased out a couple of years in. O'Hurley's second season dropped the 3D logo in favor of this new design, which seems to have had some staying power. But in March of 2008, news broke that something big was coming for Family Feud, a change that the show, in its 30-plus year history, had never before experienced. Family Feud was picked up in primetime. This was the summer of 2008. The Summer Olympics in Beijing were just around the corner, and NBC was going to be the network to broadcast them. In an attempt to capitalize on the national enthusiasm around the games, NBC branded their summer slate of shows as their, quote, all-American summer, and among the shows announced for this lineup was Celebrity Family Feud, set for a run of 6 hour-long episodes that would debut that June. Now, this was far from the first time that Family Feud had had celebrity specials. They had been a pretty regular thing throughout the show's run, and during Dawson's heyday, ABC would occasionally even put some of them on in primetime as one-off specials. But this was the first time in Family Feud's long history that it was ever ordered as a primetime series. It was exciting stuff. As the show was in development, it was expected that John O'Hurley would fulfill the role of host, but he withdrew from the project as he expected the production schedule to conflict with his work on a new show he was hosting over on CBS.
Good evening, everyone. We are live with your favorite celebrities like you have never seen them before, revealing secret talents that you never knew they had. It's a fierce, all-out competition that will crown a winner in just 6 weeks. So welcome, everyone, to Secret Talents of the Stars.
Oh yes, Secret Talents of the Stars, which was also set to run for 6 episodes, airing live each week on CBS. This was the era of the competition show. You know, American Idol, Dancing with the Stars, So You Think You Can Dance, America's Got Talent, they were still super hot items in 2008. And now that there's celebrities in the mix, man, forget Celebrity Family Feud. This was the show that was destined to be a hit. It premiered on April 8th, 2008, where its dominant ratings instantly proved that John O'Hurley had made the right call. Actually, just kidding, it was canceled 2 days later and was never broadcast again. Anyway, while John O'Hurley was busy with that disaster, Celebrity Family Feud set about casting their host, and after that decision was made, here's what NBC viewers saw on June 24th, 2008.
It all starts now with your host, Al Roker.
And good evening, everybody. everybody.
Yep, given that this show was on NBC, they pulled out a veteran of the NBC family, the very man Family Feud had made a run for in 2002, Al Roker, longtime weatherman for NBC's Today Show and all-around lovable guy. The show also sported that glitzy logo, a slightly updated set, a return to the original theme music, and a redesigned board, which now does this.
Top 5 answers are on the board.
Given that this was an hour-long show, you might expect it to have followed the format of the other hour-long versions, which were basically just 2 complete episodes played back-to-back. But instead, they opted for a tournament system. The way this worked was that each episode consisted of 3 matchups, with the last matchup being between the winners of the first 2. Each main game consists only of 3 rounds instead of the typical 4, and Fast Money is only played after the 3rd and final game, for a potential $50,000 grand prize for charity. The celebrities themselves included big names: Ice-T, Larry the Cable Guy, Joan Rivers, the Kardashians, and even Ed McMahon in one of his final public appearances before his death the following year. Some teams were real families of individual celebrities, while others were teams of co-stars on shows like The Office or My Name is Earl, the latter of which making the ill-advised decision to play the game in character, which wasn't great.
I've got 2 words for you, Mr. Roper. No deal!
But otherwise, the show was actually a lot of fun. Al Roker has this fantastic energy, always smiling, in a good mood, with this super vibrant and upbeat attitude that you can't help but enjoy. And he was able to play off people pretty well, which I think made for a lot of really entertaining moments.
Is that okay? You gonna go with liposuction?
You gonna go with that? All right, go.
No man gets liposuction.
Are you out of here? What century do you live in?
Ed said liposuction!
Liposuction!
Go.
Against that? I don't care if you're against it. Ed is here, and he said lipo. That's it. Stop it!
If it's up there,
Get surgery.
you've stolen it.
If for no other reason, this show is interesting just because it stars Al Roker, who just is not someone I would have ever envisioned as a game show host. But he actually does a remarkably good job. Just an unrivaled fun energy, which I guess is also the same thing that makes him so likable on the Today Show. Unfortunately, while the show's ratings weren't bad, it did underperform relative to what NBC had hoped for when they slapped the word celebrity on one of the most enduring franchises in American television. The show came on Tuesdays at 8 o'clock, which meant it was airing opposite ABC's brand new obstacle course competition show called Wipeout, which really shined and dominated Tuesdays during that summer. Even though Celebrity Family Feud routinely placed a respectable second to Wipeout, NBC decided not to renew the show, thus ending Family Feud's brief little romp in primetime. The main syndicated version kept on trucking though, adopting the set changes and the music changes from the celebrity version, but the show's ratings were slipping. Surely something else needed to be done to freshen up the show, to breathe new life into this old franchise. So they went looking through the history books, and here's what they came up with.
We'll start off with our bullseye round right now.
Yes, they looked back at the bullseye round, by all means a desperate attempt to add flair to a failing show, and I suppose they decided that was their hot ticket back to relevancy, because it sure worked well the first time. This version of the bullseye round operated exactly the same as the original version, and with a maximum grand prize of $30,000 if your family managed to win all the matchups. The only real difference is that this version is quick. Man, was it quick. Where the old version could take up to 5 minutes to get all the bullseye questions squared away, this version made it a clear priority to keep things moving, and the whole round is over in just about 2 minutes. That alone makes this a far better implementation of this concept, but in the grand scheme of things, I still don't know whether this is a very compelling addition to the Family Feud format. Audiences sure didn't think so, because ratings for the show had fallen into sub-2 territory, usually hovering around a 1.5 or a 1.6, which was really bad news for Fremantle Media. Stations were losing interest in carrying the show, and cancellation was seriously on the table for Family Feud. So in 2009, the head of Fremantle Media called upon Dick Askin, formerly the head of Tribune, to plead for help in somehow getting Family Feud back on its feet. Askin, by this point in his career an entertainment consultant, spent a few weeks pouring into the ratings trends, calling stations, doing as much research as he could to try and find what was wrong with this show. Fremantle originally thought the issue was somehow related to the show's distribution. Maybe the show's distributor, by this point a company called Deb WMR Mercury, wasn't doing everything to get the show on the right stations and in the right time slots. But Askin came back with a comprehensive 18-page report on the state of the show, which stated that distribution was only about 20% of the show's problem. The 80% was the show itself. He wrote about how the show's production seemed dated, about how the contestants weren't interesting enough, and about how John O'Hurley just wasn't the right talent for this job, a point he so strongly believed in that he urged Fremantle to immediately dismiss him even before a successor was in place. After their initial shock, Fremantle decided to go along with Askin, following up with a perfectly reasonable question: who should the new host be? Askin firmly believed that comedians made the best host, so Fremantle generated for him a list of 20 comedians that they were willing to consider. Among the names were George Lopez, Cedric the Entertainer, and even Chris Tucker. Can you imagine? But the name that stood out to Askin was that of Steve Harvey. Now, what is there to say about Steve Harvey? Well, so very much, but let's start at the beginning. Steve was born in West Virginia, later moving to Cleveland, Ohio, where after flunking out of college, he worked a series of odd jobs throughout the 1980s. In 1985, he began performing stand-up at a Cleveland comedy club, and he felt so confident in his gift that he took to becoming a full-time performer. It was a rough go early on, as Steve actually became homeless for 3 years, living out of a 1976 Ford Tempo as he bounced between gigs, waiting on that big break to come. The patience paid off, as Harvey was eventually offered the gig of hosting the syndicated variety show It's Showtime at the Apollo, a role he held on to from 1993 up until the year 2000. From there, his career took off. He starred in his own sitcom on the WB, which ran for 6 seasons. He started hosting his own syndicated morning radio show, and he continued his incredibly successful career in stand-up comedy, touring as one of the 4 kings of comedy alongside Bertie Mac, D.L. Hughley, and Cedric the Entertainer. He is a gifted comedian, there is no denying that, and around 2008, with a freshly bald head and as much ambition as ever, he was looking to break into the world of syndicated television, perhaps as a talk show host. To discuss this idea, he convened a lunch with Don Cornelius, the longtime host of Soul Train, and Dick Askin. Nothing immediately came out of the meeting, but fast forward 2 years and Dick Askin has a slightly different opening in syndicated television. And knowing Steve's desire to break into the medium, as well as the fact that he's a really funny guy, Askin encouraged Fremantle to make a run for Steve Harvey. Now, the story I'm about to relay is one that Steve Harvey likes to tell every so often in public, so keep in mind that he's probably used some comedic license to exaggerate it here and there. But the way he tells it, he was in New York when he got a call from an agent informing him of a game show opportunity that he could audition for in Los Angeles. They couldn't tell him which show, since John O'Hurley's dismissal was not public yet, so Steve's best guess was actually that the offer was for Deal or No Deal. He was not enthusiastic, but they urged him to at least take a meeting, so Steve, without even knowing what he was being offered, got on a plane to LA. Upon arrival, he learned that the show was Family Feud, which he initially had absolutely no interest in. He was a comedian, not a traffic cop, and what was there to do on a show like Family Feud other than just move things along? The team responded to these concerns by showing him an episode of the show with O'Hurley, which only further turned him off.
They showed me a tape, and he asked the guy, he said, "What's your favorite pet?" And the guy said, "A cow." That motherfucker said, "Well, let's see if it's up there." I'm not finna do that shit.
Steve explained to the show's crew that if he was going to do this show, he was going to poke fun at people when they said ridiculous things. The response he got was not enthusiastic.
At first, the reaction was, you can't do that. You can't put down the contestants. You can't make fun of them. The way Steve tells it is it was Gabby who spoke to the rest of the tribunal and said, wait a minute, that's what the people at home are doing. That's how you watch the show, is when you hear a ridiculous answer, you react to it and you make fun of it. So someone watching at home might very well say, I can't believe that guy said cow. Can you believe it? He was mirroring the experience of the viewer in a way that no host, including Richard Dawson, had done up to that point. She lobbied for him to get the job, even though his approach was quite different, certainly from his immediate predecessors.
So they decided to give Steve a shot at doing a run-through his way.
They set up a pretend game, a rehearsal game. They brought 2 fake families in and set up the camera crew. And all through the show, I was so funny, the cameramen stopped filming. They was just on the side of their cameras laughing.
The run-through obviously went over well, but the producers were concerned that the limits of human stamina would make it difficult for Steve to be that funny all the time. The production schedule of Family Feud is grueling. A single season comprises nearly 200 shows, with upward of 8 shows being taped in a single day. So the crew actually proposed the addition of a writing staff to ensure that Steve always had premeditated fresh material to work with, regardless of exhaustion. But Steve turned them down on the grounds that he didn't need writers to be funny. He did stage shows. He was a comedian. All he does is tell jokes on the fly. That's Steve Harvey's thing, or rather his gift, which is a concept he likes to talk about. Either way, Steve was not in love with the idea of hosting Family Feud.
I told him I wasn't going to do the show, and I get up and walking out, and I turned around to this ass lady. I said, "How much does it pay?" She said the dollar amount, and I signed the contract.
And with that, news started circulating that funny man Steve Harvey was being slotted as the next host of Family Feud, which was moving its production from Los Angeles to Orlando, partly because it was cheaper, partly because it was closer to Harvey's Atlanta home base, and partly because it made for a more interesting array of contestants. O'Hurley's departure, like Richard Karn's, came a year before his contract was up, but it was publicly billed as his voluntary decision, and he's since stated that he left the show in part because it was getting too raunchy. He has also said that while he enjoyed Family Feud, he had a lot more fun hosting, to tell the truth. For his part, Steve Harvey got to show the world his game show chops when he guest hosted Who Wants to Be a Millionaire in April of 2010, which went like this.
Who is Hervé Villachez? Who is Hervé Villachez? Who the hell are they? Who you want me to say? Hold on.
He was also riding a tremendous wave of popularity from his controversial best-selling book, Act Like a Lady, Think Like a Man, which gathered a lot of attention for saying, in so many words, that it's impossible for men and women to just be friends.
All of my friends are men. I don't have female friends. I don't. I'm incapable of that.
Family Feud's 12th season was set to debut on September 13th, 2010. The obligatory set changes for this season are pretty minor. The audience was removed from the back wall, they got rid of the inset living rooms, and a bunch of the set pieces switched back to rounded rectangles, and the set got really colorful, especially once a family wins the grand prize. And it seems like they listened to me and changed the scoreboard to a sans serif font. But Steve Harvey's true debut actually came about a month earlier, and it wasn't even on TV. On August 22nd, 2006, the Family Feud account was registered on a hot new video sharing site called YouTube.com. You might have heard of it. John O'Hurley's first season was about to start airing, and to promote the show started uploading clips and highlights to their YouTube channel. Maybe one of them could even get caught up in this new phenomenon of going viral. Who knows? The channel got off to a bit of a rocky start. The first video ever uploaded to the channel is a continuous, completely unedited shot from a single camera, sourcing audio from a single microphone. Luckily, that got ironed out by upload number 2, but a lot of the uploads still include production time codes, which is benign but interesting. Over the 4 years of O'Hurley's run on the show, 88 clips would find their way onto this YouTube channel, including such unforgettable moments as Fast Money Sneak Peek, and Sneak Peek, Fast Money. Fast forward to 2010, and it's time to drum up hype for Steve Harvey's debut, and the channel put out a series of clips about a month before his premiere, the first on August 5th. And in these videos, you can find people in the comments, even before they had seen a full episode, falling in love with Steve, with some even making bold comparisons to the illustrious Richard Dawson. On September 13th, Family Feud with Steve Harvey officially graced the airwaves for the first time. Burton Richardson, the show's announcer, actually decided not to make the move to Orlando, so naturally, they looked to a 1990s boy band to find their replacement. Take your pick. Yeah, sure, that'll work. Joey Fatone, you're the new announcer. Now introduce our man.
Give it up for Steve Harvey!
And with that, Steve Harvey's run on Family Feud officially began. And right away, he turns this show into a comedy machine. Steve was making joke after joke after joke. It wasn't just that he was making fun of bad or dubious answers, though there was certainly plenty of that, but he was able to find the humor in the smallest interactions with these families. Even the obligatory Tell Me About Yourself section of Family Feud, which had long been little more than a dull 15 seconds of television, turned into a launching pad for comedy. Nothing that anyone said or did was safe from Steve's ribbing. The brilliance of Steve Harvey and the team that decided to award him comedic autonomy was his innate understanding that Family Feud is a format tailor-made for an observational comedian with a quick wit, and he brings to each episode an animated persona that calls out every little absurdity and quirk, in addition to all the big blunders that Family Feud naturally generates just by putting ordinary people under the lights and asking them what they think. Really, that's always been the draw of Family Feud, and every host has has capitalized on it in a different way. Steve's approach was just to abandon all subtlety and really have fun messing with people, and it's no wonder that it resonated so well. I don't even need to describe it. You've seen it. You've seen how the laughs keep flowing, how Steve turns mundane banter into comedy gold without even breaking a sweat. Steve Harvey was made to host Family Feud, and Family Feud was made for a talent like Steve Harvey. And the ratings proved that right off the bat. 3 months in, he was already up 36% over the previous year. And TV ratings were just part of the story. Family Feud was reaching a new audience, one that would probably never otherwise be inclined to watch a game show in the first place, by harnessing that rickety Family Feud YouTube channel to go viral. The end of his first season, Steve Harvey had doubled the show's ratings, taken the internet by storm on multiple occasions, and completely rebranded Family Feud as fresh, funny, must-see TV for the first time in a very, very long while. And the growth kept going strong as Steve began his second season in the fall of 2011, now with a glorious high-definition production based out of Atlanta, Georgia. Family Feud was a hot commodity, and so was Steve Harvey himself, who was concurrently still enjoying popularity from his morning radio show and his relationship books, and then he also added a syndicated daytime talk show to his repertoire when he signed on with NBCU to bring a show simply titled Steve Harvey onto the air in the fall of 2012. And when that time came, his talk show made waves, and Family Feud kept hitting series best ratings. His fourth season on Feud started in 2013, during which time he brought the show to be the #1 game show in syndication among the most valuable demographics. It wasn't beating other shows in total viewers, but as for the young viewers that advertisers actually care about, Family Feud had them locked up, in large part because highlights and clips from the show were continually pervading the social media that younger viewers were using. Viral Family Feud videos were a constant and unavoidable presence online, to the point where even someone who had never seen a single episode of Family Feud was likely familiar with its concept and its host, just by the nature of how much these videos saturated the web. Steve's fifth season provided even more growth in the ratings, as it kept inching closer and closer to Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy, climbing and climbing throughout, until in June of 2015, it happened. For the first time since the modern Nielsen rating system was established in 1987, Family Feud was the #1 show in syndication. Just pause for a second and take that in. This format was almost 40 years old. Its heyday was over 30 years in the rear view, yet this show stuck around. It came back from 2 cancellations. It survived a bunch of weird, desperate format changes. It was kept around even as it was failing to make any cultural impact, or really to find any audience large enough to do much of anything beyond just keeping it profitable. 4 different hosts, plus the original host himself, had all tried to recapture the popularity that the show had once enjoyed, and to varying degrees, they had all failed. 25 years of mediocrity, and instead of throwing in the towel, the people behind this show recognized the magic that laid beneath its surface, if only they could find the right person to tap into it. Steve Harvey was the show's Hail Mary. It was a choice between either canceling the show or taking a chance on a completely untested approach to this format. After everything this show had endured, to see it at #1 again proved that all that toil had really paid off. All those years of floundering were just setting the stage for a big splash. Family Feud was back on top. And to really bring things full circle, ABC started expressing interest in carrying a new season of Celebrity Family Feud for their summer primetime lineup. So in the summer of 2015, Family Feud returned to its original home network for the first time in 30 years, almost to the date. Celebrity Family Feud with Steve Harvey kept the hour-long time frame, but dropped the tournament style of the NBC version, opting instead to basically run 2 distinct episodes back-to-back. It debuted on June 21st, ironically enough replacing Wipeout in ABC's summer lineup, and it sported a much larger set with a darker color scheme and a real affinity for searchlights. Also, with this show being taped in Los Angeles again, it meant that Burton Richardson was able to return as announcer after his long absence from the franchise.
And now, the star of our show, Steve Harvey!
Over the course of its debut 6-episode season, Celebrity Family Feud wrapped the summer as the most popular new series, and the #1 show to air on Sunday nights, averaging 9.4 million viewers per episode. ABC renewed the show for a second season. Then, just to add another iron to Steve Harvey's very large fire, he started hosting a show called Little Big Shots on NBC, a sort of variety show centered around children. It debuted in March of 2016, attracted almost 13 million viewers, and ended the season as the 13th most popular show show in primetime. Honestly, I do not think it's a stretch to say that around this time, Steve Harvey was one of the busiest, most sought-after, most popular entertainers on the planet. It seemed like everything he touched turned to gold, and that rise to prominence came on the heels of his success on Family Feud. He had even started hosting the Miss Universe pageant in 2015, and I'm happy to report that it was a flawless performance with absolutely no resulting controversy. This was the peak of Harvey mania, however. As 2016 turned to 2017, ratings for all of the shows he hosted began slow declines. They were still popular, very popular in fact, just down from their peaks. Little Big Shots fell from number 13 to number 25, then from number 25 to number 57 by the summer of 2018, at which point Steve left the show. By that time, Family Feud, which had moved its production back to Los Angeles, had fallen to second in all of syndication, behind Judge Judy, but still ahead of Wheel and Jeopardy. And his talk show, in a slightly retooled format taking the official new name Steve, was still doing well by the standards of the genre. Of course, Steve Harvey's Family Feud has remained inescapable for anyone online. There are many clips and compilations of feud highlights, all with Steve Harvey inexplicably holding his card up in the thumbnail, that have amassed millions, often tens of millions of views on YouTube, and that's not even factoring in other social networks. As time went on, the writing staff on Family Feud really started to lean into Steve's brand of comedy by crafting questions that seemed like they were designed to generate raunchy answers. Raunch, of course, was nothing new for Family Feud. It's not like the show was squeaky clean before Steve Harvey came along, as some people like to say, but the theme was definitely becoming more frequent and more deliberate. Even the wording of the answers on the board took on a more overtly risque language. Steve is well known for his lively reactions to raunchy answers, and the more raunch there is, the more reactions you get. The overreactions have themselves become a common theme of jokes that people like to make online.
She said, I said the top fruit.
It just goes to show how culturally relevant Family Feud really is, and I think that's the most important thing to say about Steve Harvey's run on the show. Family Feud has never been more popular or more relevant than it has been under Steve Harvey, and I think that's remarkable. It is a format that everyone knows. It is a frequent setup for a Saturday Night Live sketch or a segment on a talk show, and it's a merchandising machine, with Family Feud card games and video games being pretty consistent staples on the shelves of game stores. There's not much else to say. Steve Harvey's tenure has been a long victory lap for a show that seemed like it was always going to be the underdog. The look and feel of the show has changed some over the years. The set got a facelift around the time that the celebrity version went on the air, spacing out all those little dots of light, adding this colorful border to the big oval, and just touching up some of the animations and visual cues. The logo also got glitzier over the years, even though the change seems not to have made it onto Steve's card yet, and Steve's wardrobe kept getting flashier and flashier, with all sorts of colorful suits and interesting fashion choices. The show did have to undergo some changes in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, at which point the show moved back to Atlanta, spaced out the set, got rid of the live audience, and placed Steve pretty far away from all the family members he was interacting with, putting an end to the era of the Family Feud host that invades the personal space of Fast Money contestants.
This is the best part of the show, where we get to turn around and hug.
As of 2022, this seems to be the set that's currently in use, and given that the pandemic is still ongoing, it remains to be seen if or when they'll ever revert the changes. Before I wrap up this video, I did want to touch on the fact that Family Feud is by no means a strictly American show. This format has been adopted in a slew of different nations, and many of these adaptations are on today. Just to name a few, there's a Canadian version hosted by a comedian named Jerry D on a set that looks virtually identical to the American set it's based on. There is a British version called Family Fortunes, which was recently revived with host Gino D'Acampo, who is a celebrity chef. Here in the United States, there is a Spanish language version of the show, and there is a South African version hosted by Steve Harvey. Yes, in 2019, Steve Harvey crafted a highly unusual deal with Fremantle, under which his production company, Steve Harvey Global, would be able to license the format for African versions of Family Feud, and the result of that was this adaptation, complete with KFC product placements and accents that Steve Harvey sometimes has trouble understanding.
Anger. Anger. When you're angry.
Here in the US, Family Feud, as well as its celebrity counterpart on ABC, are both still going strong as I produce this video. Steve's talk show is still on, now exclusive to Facebook Watch, and just recently he's taken on another role in ABC Primetime. Judge. Judge Steve Harvey. That's the title of the show that debuted in January of 2022, and while it does have the general format of a typical courtroom show a la Judge Judy, Steve, who has no legal background, essentially turns the courtroom setting into another hotbed for comedy. It's 42 minutes of Steve Harvey picking on people who have made dumb decisions or gotten themselves into petty squabbles, and with Steve's sensibilities, it actually makes for pretty great comedy. In 2019, Steve Harvey entered his 9th year as host of Family Feud, officially surpassing Richard Dawson in length of tenure. At the time I'm recording this, he's finishing up his 11th year as host, with no indication that he'll be leaving anytime soon.
I think the future of Family Feud is largely up to Steve Harvey. I think that as long as he wants to do it, it will remain prominent and successful. If he ever were to step down, those would be awfully hard shoes to fill now. Even Richard Dawson's shoes would not have been as difficult to fill as Steve's will be. And I, on behalf of millions of fans of the show, hope he doesn't leave anytime soon. I think he has brought that show to life and to prominence in a way that nobody else could have. My deepest respect and admiration go to him for how he's turned that show around, and with Gabby's help has made it a new classic.
I don't think there's any denying that Steve Harvey is the most prolific host of Family Feud, but I also think it's important to remember all of his predecessors, who all brought unique, individual talents to this one core format. I think every version of this show still holds up today, and I think the overall story of how we ultimately landed where we are today is fascinating, hence why I have devoted so many hours of my life to talking about it. Before I wrap things up, I did want to talk about what the former hosts have been up to since leaving Family Feud. Al Roker, if you even count him, is still on the Today Show as one of the most recognizable faces on morning television. John O'Hurley has remained a consistent presence on television, quite often in voice acting roles, and he's even popped up every once in a while to host some Family Feud segment on whatever morning show he's appearing on. Richard Karn has also continued his acting career, most notably including a recurring role on the Hulu series Pen 15, and he recently reunited with his Home Improvement co-star Tim Allen to host a History Channel competition show called Assembly Required. He also randomly started trending on Twitter as I was writing the script for this video following this tweet he sent out reading, "I've thought long and hard about NFTs and I've decided that it's not something I need to do," onto which he attached this inexplicable selfie. That was a delightful day to be on Twitter. And lastly, there is Louie Anderson. In the decade following his time on Family Feud, Louie Anderson devoted his energy to a Las Vegas stand-up act called Louie Larger Than Life. And once the show closed, Louie stayed in the public eye through regular late-night appearances and pop-up stand-up comedy performances. In 2016, he took on an acting role on the FX series Baskets, where he portrayed Christine Baskets, the mother of twins portrayed by Zach Galifianakis. It is a phenomenal performance that ranges from gut-busting on-the-nose hilarity to touching and powerful moments as the series progresses. In 2017, Louie began appearing as a regular panelist on the syndicated panel game show Funny You Should Ask, the show that Bob Boden executive produces, and he stands out as one of the absolute funniest panelists on the show. Really, all of Louie's comedy is tremendous. To attempt to describe what makes Louie funny would be a disservice to his talent. Some people are just funny, as though by predestination, and Louie is one of them. When I need a laugh, Louie's name is one of the first that goes into the YouTube search bar, and that's an approach that I highly recommend. Throughout his career, he remained as upbeat and energetic as ever, never losing his magic touch, always remaining a joy to watch. I don't think it's controversial to say that Louie's work on Family Feud was not a highlight of his long and varied career. He gave it his best, but at the end of the day, it just was not a format that was suited to his specific set of talents. And even though the way his run on the show ended was less than harmonious, he returned to the show as a contestant in 2019 on Steve Harvey's Celebrity Family Feud, and this appearance, like everything else he's done, is a joy to watch. Unfortunately, Louie Anderson was admitted to the hospital on January 18, 2022, after experiencing complications with large B-cell lymphoma. The complications took his life 3 days later, on January 21st. Over the ensuing days, tributes poured in for Louie Anderson, with countless celebrities and comedians and entertainment figures offering their condolences and remembering the many laughs that Louie brought them. But additionally, and perhaps more importantly, everyone, and really everyone, made some remark about how kind a person he was, how warm and down-to-earth and wonderful he was as a human being. Bob Boden even mentioned it, and our interview was recorded before Louie passed.
He's a frequent guest on Funny You Should Ask, which is a show that I work on now, and a delightful human being, by the way.
With the loss of Louie Anderson, the world lost not only a hilarious comedian, but by all accounts, a genuinely kind soul. He will undoubtedly be sorely missed. Alright, that was sad. These videos always seem to end on a sad note, don't they? But with all that said, this marks the end of the story of Family Feud. I hope I covered everything. I thank you for bearing with me throughout this long and somewhat ridiculous journey, and I hope you'll join me for whatever ridiculous deep dive I take up next. But until that time comes, goodbye.
This was the card that Louie used for the endgame. You can't see the rest of this room, but I have the podium from the Richard Dawson Ray Combs version in this room. So there it is, and it works.
I knew they wouldn't miss again. I better run if I wanna get out of this town alive. Damn. I should've wrote a book